Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're privileged to have retired Air Force Colonel Frank Alfter with us. He's going to tell us about the trials and tribulations his father went through when he was shot down in World War II. He's brought a few artifacts that you can take a look at. Of course, we'll answer questions when we're done. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Okay. Well, the story is really about not just my dad, but of course I focus on him a bit. It's kind of like you focus on your uncle. But it's about the 384th Bomb Group, which is my dad's bomb group. I'm now the president of that bomb group. We just came back from England Tuesday. We were over there for a reunion. When we go back to England, we call it a junket. So this was our 12th junket. Now, I first met the people in the bomb group in 1985, and now I'm way older than they were when I met them. So time passes on. Anyway, so we're gonna talk about anatomy of a shoot down. I think that's an appropriate title because we're gonna dissect how it all happened. But that airplane in the picture there is called Silver Dollar. And talk about freak incidents. What happened was, in 1985, I had my dad's, they have a book that the bomb group produced. It's called As Briefed. It tells the story of the 384th during World War II. I had that book with me and I was getting autographs, right? So this one guy I approached, he was the guy that took the picture. And he wrote in my book, I should have brought the book, but he wrote in my book, Silver Dollar went down, no shoot scene, no survivors. That was 1985. 1994, I went to a reunion down in Sarasota, Florida, and because my dad was a POW and they had these sidebars, you could go to POW, you could go to whatever, but I went to the POW sidebar and I met this guy. He was the ball turret gunner. And until then, nobody knew there were any survivors on that airplane. And as if that isn't weird enough, in 2003, I think it was, one of the waist gunners shows up.
Oh my God.
And those two guys got together. They're gone now, but they got together.
Yeah.
So it's things like that make it more interesting for me, and I stay involved. If you see the patch there, it says "Keep the show on the road." That was written by a pilot was shot down and was captured, and the first letter from him as a POW that went back to Grafton Underwood said, "You guys keep the show on the road," and so it became the motto. Well, that's what all of us next generation and the next generation are trying to do, is keep that bomb group's show on the road. So it was great to go back to England this past week. Let's see if this works. All right, where are we pointing?
Turned on.
Maybe, that's, oh, red, let's try this.
No, let me give you a tech assist real quick. I think I know what the issue is. It's not a manual operator problem. We really need to work on our IT department.
So it should work now, yeah? Look at that.
Should work.
Yeah. Magic.
It's $85 for a service call, by the way.
Charge it in.
Yeah, right.
This is the outline. We're going to talk about Grafton Underwood, which is where I was just last week. And the mission for this particular mission on 13 April 44 was the 301st for the 8th Air Force, but it was the 89th for the bomb group. All right, so they hadn't been there for the whole time, but anyway, then the group wing and division formation, I'll show you how that works. A lot of people want to know, what does the combat box looks like? We'll show you that, and where my dad was in it all. And then entering enemy airspace, Luftwaffe response. And oh, by the way, another thing that was kind of neat, while I was stationed at Ramstein, 96 to 2000, one day I get an email from this German guy, Horst Rapp. I didn't know him from Horst. He says, answer my email, I know where your dad's airplane went down. Well, by then, I had already been to where my dad's airplane went down, so I knew, but I contacted this guy. And the interesting thing was, he had done research in the German archives. I'd done research in the National Archives and a few other places, and talking, well, some of the crew was still alive. But he had some facts that we didn't know about. For instance, in the debriefing, they said that there were long-nosed Focke-Wulf 190s that attacked him. Well, my friend Horst said, no, we didn't have long-nosed Focke-Wulfs in the war at that time. So even though you read it here, it doesn't make it true. So you have to have both sides of the thing figured out. But anyway, Luftwaffe response, so we'll have that. And he actually interviewed some of the pilots that shot him down.
Oh, jeez.
So,
Oh,
cool.
brother.
And then the first attack, and then reformation, and then there's a second attack right at the IP. That's where my dad was shot down. And then RTB, that's return to base. And then the rest of the story, was it Walter Winchell or one of those guys said?
Paul Harvey.
Paul Harvey, there it is. The rest of the story. So this is Grafton Underwood then. If you look upper left-hand corner is the officers' club, the right, that's barracks. It's a Nissen hut kind of a thing. And then the flight line, there's mass going on in the base chapel. The headquarters building there on the bottom, and that's Colonel Dale Smith. Now, you might notice how tall this guy is, because that plays into this as well. I mean, he was a head taller than everybody else. Just a giant of a guy. And then the picture on the left, the circled face there, that's my good friend. He's gone now. Quentin Bland. He was that old when the war was going on, and he donated a lot of parts. If you look at Memphis Belle in the Air Force Museum, there are many parts from Grafton Underwood in that airplane, and it's because of him. And then the base, that's the layout of the base. It shows you the perimeter taxiways and the 3 runways. Today, the runways are gone, reverted back to farming, but there's still some of the perimeter track and some hard stands there. And we're restoring the old ops building to be a museum. Tower's gone, almost everything else is gone. So where is it? Well, there's England, Northamptonshire with Northampton in it, and you look at the one on the right, it's right next to Kettering. Isn't that cool? We have Kettering here. They don't say Kettering, they say Kettering. But Grafton Underwood is just out in the farmers' fields out to the east of Kettering. Oh, and the guy in the upper right, that's that kid you were looking at earlier. And that airplane seat, that airplane seat is one of the many things that he donated to Memphis Belle.
Oh, wow. Oh.
The more visible thing on Memphis Belle is if you go around and look at the tail gunner's position. If you're sitting in the gun position, this window will open. He donated that, and that's really visible. Some of the other stuff isn't quite so visible. But that's Quentin Bland. This is what it looks like today. If you drive into Grafton Underwood, it's just a little village. They never had a pub, but now they've got a bistro. When I met Quentin and his wife, they lived in the post office. And the post office, their house, the post office was attached to it, and it was kind of a store as well. But the sign there says 8th Air Force Memorial Window. In the village church, there's a great big stained glass window. It's called Coming Home. It shows a B-17, White Cliffs of Dover. It has the 4 squadron patches. It has the cross and the Star of David in it. Kind of neat. Nice little town. Okay, the mission. This is the ops building that we're restoring. I mean, if you had seen it 2 years ago, it's all overgrown with trees and you name it, so our English friends chopped down all that stuff, and when they're clearing out some of the ground to make room for other stuff, they discovered a lot of things. One of the things was they cleared the space in front of the building, and there's these little slots in the concrete. Those slots where you park your bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
You put your front tire in there. Things like that. But That's the ops building, that's where they did all their planning for the missions. Here they are servicing an airplane. You notice the name of the airplane is Section 8? They have a lot of good names, that's one of them, that's really good. They're servicing liquid oxygen, and there's guys working on the chin turret there. But that's getting ready for the mission. This is the airplane my dad was shot down in. Okay, the name, Big Stoop. Remember that? Colonel Dale, the really tall guy. All right, when I started asking him, when we still had a lot of veterans alive, by the way, we had one veteran with us this last trip. He was 98 and he was vertical. And I got him into the tail gunner's compartment on Sally B again, because we did it back in 2019. But anyway, Big Stoop. So I started asking, where did that name come from? You see it's S-T-U-P-E? Well, during World War II, there was, well, even after World War II, there was a Terry and the Pirates comic strip, all right? Well, during the war, there was a character, a Chinaman, a really big, tall Chinaman who was a deaf mute, and they called him Stoop. But his name was S-T-O-O-P. So I'm thinking, all right. I even wrote to the company that did that comic strip to find out if they knew. But then talking to some of the other veterans, well, it was named after the colonel. Nobody liked him. And it's like stoop as in stupid.
Yeah.
So that's the name of the airplane. Now, Dad flew on 6 or 7 different airplanes in the 23 missions he flew, but that's the one he was shot down in. And of course, that's the line chief, Master Sergeant Alfter, standing next to the airplane. This is Father Method C. Billy. And isn't that a name? Father Billy. I met him. He's one of the many guys I met years ago, but you know, he's blessing the crew before a mission. That was a common occurrence. All right, so now we're talking about formation. How do you get these airplanes all together in a formation? I mean, you think about it, English weather sucks anyway, most of the time. And try flying in that stuff with just your airplane, let alone 22 other ones from your same base. Plus hundreds more from other bases, because you'll see that here in a minute. So the formation, here's the taxi for takeoff parade, as they called it. And there's a whole line of B-17s there, but they all crank up at a certain time, and they taxi out, and then they're going to begin their takeoff. Now this is a side view. You have Grafton Underwood in the lower left-hand corner, and what they do is they fly out, see it says Buncher, number 29. That's a radio beacon. Each base has one of those. They're called bunchers. And so Grafton Underwood's was 29. They fly around that thing, and they get up into, you know, you see you've got some clouds there. That was typical. But you have all these airplanes taking off, one right after the other, and then you start climbing through all that stuff, and you've got the lead high group, you've got the lead group, and then you have the lead low group. That was my dad's group, or not group, but squadron. So they're working their way up to that altitude, 8,000 feet is where they finally assembled. Looking at it from the top, all right, you see the airplanes going into this thing. Let's see if this will work. You see them, doesn't work. The lower left-hand corner, they enter the circle at the bottom that you just saw, and they work their way around. You'll notice in this part of it, right in this area at the 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock position, there are a small number of airplanes, and then you work your way around here, there's more airplanes, and you get up there, and then you got the whole group. You have 3 squadrons, and they're at 8,000 feet. And then once they're formed up, then they head for their next beacon. And it's not a buncher, it's a splasher. So the splasher beacons is where the group heads up, forms up with the other one. You'll notice there's a red star, that's Grafton Underwood, and then there's 2 blue dots. Those 3 groups form the 41st Combat Wing. And in all these other places, that's England. It's like an aircraft carrier, only it's kind of busy. So you have all those airfields, and they all have the little black dots are their buncher beacons, and then the stars, the yellow stars, those are the splashers, and that's where they meet up. By the time you get to Clacton-on-Sea in the lower right-hand corner, that's where they depart the English coast. Now they've got all of those combat wings and groups and squadrons together heading out over the channel. So it's kind of busy.
Yeah.
And try doing that in really crappy weather. This is what it looks like from the air. You know, they're in formation, they're crossing the channel. Now, the combat box, the combat box is developed so that they have protection with all the guns that are on the airplanes. And they had somewhere, most of them had like 13 guns on each airplane, but for defenses, they're in a combat box, so the enemy can't just break into the box kind of thing. Well, looking at it from the top, on this top part here, it shows the lead squadron, the 547th. It shows the low squadron, my dad's squadron, 545th, and then the high squadron, which is above the lead squadron, is the 547th, 6th, because there's another 47th. But anyway, then you look at it from the back end, that stack looks like this on the left-hand side. That's what it looks like if you're looking at it from the back. You're looking at it from the tail. And then the other one is, that's what it looks like from the side. So it's a really complex thing, and you have to maintain your direction, your airspeed, and everything else, so these guys are constantly working this thing. You're not on autopilot. not gonna do it. Now, this is the formation of aircraft that left Grafton Underwood when my dad took off that day on the 13th of April. You got 23 aircraft launched. All right, 2 of those aircraft are air spares. That means if somebody falls out, they fill in, right? Well, before they get to the coast, the spares turned back because it seemed like everything was going okay. Well, as soon as they got to, we'll see that here next. And my dad's airplane would be that middle one on the left. The guy's name is Heffley. That's his pilot. And I'm sorry about this, but on the bottom you see the RTBs. Those are the spares. They turned back too early. Of course, hindsight's not worth a darn, but they turned back too early because over here in this dark area you see 2 ABs. Those are air aborts. One of them aborted as they crossed the coast. He had an engine problem, so he turned back. And then over the channel, before they got to France, another one had an engine problem and turned back. It would have been nice if the spares were still there, but they weren't. And I apologize for that blue thing. We couldn't figure out how to get rid of that. We're technologically inept. All right, so now they're entering enemy airspace with what's left. So you have 19 aircraft are left. And that's the formation. Now the lead guy is this Bedsole guy up on the very top of the chart. And then again, my dad's squadron is the low squadron down here, and then the high squadron on the right with the lead squadron up front. So the Luftwaffe response, because they weren't sleeping. This is probably hard to see from that distance, but there's a lot of, see the dark spots up on the top of it? Those are German air bases. And there's 2 fighter groups, German fighter groups, that were alerted. And it was at 12:45 they were alerted, so they took off. And basically, to make it really simple, they flew from those bases to Frankfurt and flew over Frankfurt to figure out where these guys were going. So they came from all those other bases up there. There's Stormeda, there's Hohenberg, or Waldorf and Stade, and a bunch of German towns up north. But they all flew down there, and now they're waiting for these guys. Which way are they going? And the line on the map, that's the path, that was the briefed map path that they were going to fly to get to Schweinfurt, because Schweinfurt was their target. Okay, so, and it talks about, these are the aircraft that the Germans had. You had the ME-109 G6s. We've got one of those in the Air Force Museum. It's got a 30 millimeter cannon right through the engine. and then 2 more smaller ones above the engine. Pretty good airplane in itself. But then you had Focke-Wulf 190A6s. Those were the normal Focke-Wulf 190s. But then they had this 190A-7. That's the up armored one. It had 30 millimeter and 20 millimeter. And I mean, it had 6 guns all total. That was kind of their butcher airplane. They would go through the formation and just chew them right up. So the first attack, when they came through the formation, there were 15 MU-109s came through, and they took out this second airplane down here, Tolleson. And then a couple minutes later, 20 minutes later, they took out the lead. So the group lead is now shot down. So to fix that, the guy, Bennett P, moves into that slot, and the other airplane's just gone. And this will show, okay, then there's the second attack. The second attack was really murder. This is what I call the sucker punch. Because we had P-47 escort, by the way. I didn't mention that before, but we had escort, right? Well, they didn't do anything on the first, they were able to run off the MU-109s. They only shot down 2 of our airplanes, I say only. But they ran them off. But on the second attack, they had another bunch of MU-109s come through. Well, the P-47s went after them. Well, as soon as the P-47s went after them, the Focke-Wulf 190s came through. You know, they first came through with their, not the up armored ones, but the red line there shows the Dash 7s that came through, and they took out 6 of the 7 airplanes in that squadron in less than 3 minutes. So, I mean, that's what I call the sucker punch, because they drew off our fighters, and then the big guys came in and chewed them up. So all those airplanes are gone, and this is all they had left going across the target. So only 11 aircraft made it to Schweinfurt, dropped their bombs, but they're not done. So, yeah, return to base, RTB. On the way home, another one gets taken out by flak, not fighters, but flak, somewhere over near Brussels. And it blew up, so there was nobody got out of that one. So, when that airplane, see the little flash over by Belgium, that's where that airplane went down. And you still see the path that they took. Well, in the red circle down here, that's where my dad's airplane ended up. They crash landed in a farmer's field in France. You know, so when you look at the map and you see where they are, and I often wondered this, and I don't have any verification other than it makes sense. Why did my dad's airplane end up down there and not somewhere along that line? Well, the only thing that I can surmise is that their pilot knew they weren't going to make it to England. You know, so it was gently rolling hills in France, and he knew that. Because one of the other airplanes that went down, one of the other 6 that went down, they had to bail out over Belgium. The other ones just crashed in Germany, but that one almost made it to England, but they ran out of luck and they had to bail out. Well, there was already a dead gunner on board when that one went down. And a Belgian lady friend of mine wrote a book about that. She was with us in England this past week. Interesting story. That's more, but that's not part of this. But anyway, other than the fact that she wrote a book on it, and they are available, it's a pretty good book with a lot of pictures. Well, anyway, so my dad's airplane ended up in Rambourg, France. This shows, all right, this is the scoreboard. There were the 2 air aborts that turned back, and then you've got 8 airplanes down here that didn't make it back. They were shot down. And as it turns out, that was the worst mission for the 384th Bomb Group for the entire war. You know, I mean, it's not the worst for the 8th Air Force, because when they did Schweinfurt back in '43, that was bad. But this was the worst one for this bomb group for the entire war. So the rest of the story. This is my dad's crew. This is when they were training in Dalhart, Texas. Another interesting story, you see the short guy in there? You know what position he was in?
Yeah.
Ball turret, right? Okay, well, these guys were in training there in Dalhart, and then one day they were told, don't go downtown tonight. You know, I mean, they were always going downtown. Whenever they got off work, they were going downtown, you know. This is Texas, let's go drink some beer. You know? Well, they were told, don't go downtown. They weren't told why, because, you know, everything's classified, but the ball turret gunner couldn't help himself. He went downtown. Well, they left in the middle of the night without him. So then they get to England, they pick up another ball turret gunner. Well, the 3rd of March, he got frostbite and he never flew again. So Dad went through 3 ball turret gunners. The guy in the far left, that's Sam Deutsch. He was the top turret gunner, flight engineer. He was the oldest guy on the crew because he was at Pearl Harbor when that happened. And then they trained him as a flight engineer gunner, and he went off with these guys. He was the oldest guy on the crew. He was the last guy to die.
How old was he on the crew?
He was 20, I want to say 6.
Oh, it isn't old.
You know, because the pilots were like 22, maybe 24. But he was the oldest guy in the crew. He was Jewish. That's another part of the story, because he was one of the 4 who managed to evade capture and made it back to England. Because if you go in the Air Force Museum, you'll notice there's a Holocaust section.
Yeah.
All right, a lot of people wonder, why do we have that? Well, a lot of our crew were Jewish,
Yeah.
and they could end up in a concentration camp just as easily as a POW camp.
And it's not in history books anymore.
Yeah,
They don't teach it.
yeah. You know, so anyway, and then the guy to my dad's left, my dad's circle, that's the radio operator, Bill Shade. Now, I met those 2 guys, of course my dad, but we had a get-together in, Bill Shade was from Pennsylvania. Well, Sam Deutsch and his wife came out from California. So it was those 2 guys and their wives and my wife and me visiting, and what a blast. You know, just, but I couldn't get him to tell anything. What was my dad like when he was a POW, you know? Was he a good guy? Because my dad died, he was only 58 when he died. It was a long time ago. And then there's the rest of the crew. Of course, Heffley is the guy kneeling on the far left. They all bragged about Heffley. He was a good pilot. He knew the airplane. He knew it so well that when Bill Shade had a problem with the radio on one of the trips they were coming back, they needed to contact and call in, radio wouldn't work. So Bill Shade went through what he was taught in school to fix these things, and he ran out, you know, he was just out of options. So the pilot gets out of his seat, Heffley, he comes back to the radio room, and he pulls the lid off this radio, pulls the lid off that radio, pulls that dead tube out, takes that tube, sticks it in, radio works. You know, so they bragged about Heffley a lot. And it really came into play when they put it down in France. There's Big Stoop again. This is my dad's POW picture. Everything is slid around. My dad and the pilot and the navigator were wounded when they were shot down, because after the first attack, the Focke-Wulfs took out 2 engines, and so then they dumped all their bombs and they headed back, and of course they headed to France. Now, I think I know why, as we mentioned earlier, but as they were leaving German airspace, what's really German airspace? French? But anyway, 2 109s were chasing them and shooting at him. Well, my dad's back there in the tail, so he's fighting these guys off, and a 20 mil round exploded in there, and he had shrapnel in his left temple and his left shoulder. And more bullets went up through the belly of the airplane and hit the pilot in the right calf, and hit the navigator in the left buttock. You know, and they were bleeding pretty badly, so when they got on the ground, the pilot and the navigator wanted to be captured because they needed medical attention. Dad thought he was John Wayne. You know, he was going to hide out a little longer, and he did. It was several hours before they discovered him, and you'll see that building in a minute. The 2 guys in the lower left, they were French resistance during the war. They were the same age as my dad at the time, 18. You know, and The guy on the right is Jimmy. Syriac is his name, but everybody called him Jimmy. Jamin was his last name. That's his wife on the right there. Well, I met him in 1999 when I was stationed at Ramstein because Sam Deutsch told me, go there. And oh, by the way, they don't speak any English. So I took a Belgian friend of mine when I was in NATO. He went with me. So they told me the basic story about what happened, where the airplane went down, and showed me the place that Dad was captured. And all that was, it was really, really interesting, but it gets even more interesting. This is the airplane on the ground. Now, it looks totally destroyed. It was not totally destroyed. That's after setting off the thermite bombs. You know, you have to destroy the equipment, the bomb site and all that other stuff. So the radio operator, Bill Shade, what I found out later, he's the one who punched the button. It could be the radio operator, could be either pilot, punch a button and those thermite bombs go off and all the equipment on the airplane is destroyed. So the whole front end of the airplane, you know, it looks like it was totaled, but the airplane was totally intact. In fact, the bombardier, when it came to, well, it wouldn't be screeching halt. What kind of noise you make when you're in dirt? When it came to a halt, the bombardier busted through the nose, took a tumble, got up and ran. So the airplane was intact. This shows what the French resistance took after the fact. Now this is 2014. Now Jimmy's gone. Jimmy died later in '99. I'm glad I went there when I did. But we went back to visit his wife. The guy on the far left behind my wife, that's my wife in the purple coat, that's Hans. He's the Belgian who went with me the first time. And so I emailed him, this is 2014, and he's retired Belgian Air Force. He was a Belgian Air Force adjutant, think E8. You know, so I said, hey Hans, would you be interested in going back to Ramacourt? And he said, yeah, you know. So he met us there. And then that's Colette in the front. And the two guys on the right are her son and son-in-law. Their families were there. And one of them speaks a little bit of English, but Hans definitely helped out because Hans speaks 5 languages. Anyway, so the building in the upper right, that's where my father was captured. When Jimmy was getting these guys out of the airplane, he took the ones that could with him to the woods south of the village. And that shed in the lower right-hand corner is where they hid out. Well, my dad decided that all he was going to do was hold them up. And so he let them go on south of the woods, and he went to the right on a back road and ended up in that building. And at the time, that building was the village washroom. That's where you did your laundry. Today, it's sports equipment storage. But Dad hid out in there, and it was a couple hours when the Germans finally figured out there's somebody in there. So they went in there and they captured my dad. So then they took Dad to the hospital in Nancy. You saw the picture of his bandages and all that. Well, they took him to the hospital in Nancy, and the story that my dad always told was the doctors took the shrapnel out of his shoulder. They were German doctors. Took the shrapnel out of his shoulder, but they were afraid of working trying to get it out of his head because they thought they'd kill him. You know, do no harm, right? Well, there was a soldier guarding Dad. He whipped out his dagger and he took the metal out of Dad's head.
Oh, God.
He didn't have to do no harm. So, and then the lower picture shows a piece of the yoke from my dad's airplane. This last time when we visited Colette in 2014, we were all saying our goodbyes because Hans had to go back to Liège, that's where he lived, and then we were going to go back towards Ramstein, that's where we were staying while we were in Germany that time. Well, she goes off into another room, comes back, and she gives me that piece of the yoke. Now, Sam Deutsch had been there in '85, and he had bits and pieces, shards, you know, because it's in a farmer's field. Every time they plow, there's more stuff comes up.
Oh,
You know, the Germans haul away the bulk of it to smelt it down and reuse it, but metal turns up all the time. And so he had a lot of that, and I was jealous, but then, hey, he was on the crew. Well, he's gone, I'm over there, she gives that to me, and I've got that sitting right up here.
mhm.
This is our website. It's a real easy website. It's 384th Bomb Group, all one word, .com. with the TH, 384thbombgroup.com. But you can, the information that's in there is just awesome. I mean, I learned some other things about my dad from looking at that. Like I know exactly what tail numbers he flew. I knew what position he flew in. The first half of his missions, he was in the waist. He was 6'1.5", so the waist was a good place for him. But he was a damn good shot. So the last 9 missions, he was in the tail, because that's where you really needed him. And he used to tell me that the Germans would sneak up to you in your own contrails. You're looking backwards, the contrails from your engines are just, clouding everything up back there. They would sneak up in the contrails, and you wouldn't know it till you saw their wings winking, which meant their guns were firing. But anyway, that's just a sample of one of the pages on this particular mission. And as I said, we had fighter escort. Well, they did it in relays until they had longer range tanks and the P-51s and some of the other aircraft. But for penetration, they had these 47s. And then for penetration, target, and withdrawal, they had P-51s. And then finishing up the withdrawal with P-38s. And what's really cool to me about these P-38s, that was the 55th Fighter Squadron. I was in the 55th Tactical Fighter Squadron in Upper Hayford in the 80s. So those are my guys. This is Schweinfurt, what it looked like as they were bombing it. Of course, there's a B-17 coming across there. And then this is a post-damage assessment when you fly photo reconnaissance over to see if we actually hit the target. And I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
No,
Sure.
Why were we trying to hit Schweinfurt? What was the target?
Ball bearings. Yeah, Schweinfurt, and this was my dad's 3rd trip to Schweinfurt. There were more before that, because if you know about Black Thursday, that was an October 43 mission to Schweinfurt, and we lost 60% of our airplanes. 8th Air Force. 384th wasn't there yet. But Schweinfurt, they made ball bearings, and that's key to the aircraft industry in Germany. Sir?
In retrospect, how do they assess destroying the ball bearings as opposed to just, the factor couldn't make them, but you couldn't really destroy the ball bearings, could you?
No, but you could destroy their capability to make them.
Make them, yeah, okay. So but it was considered successful
Yeah.
in the post-mission analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, they would fly photo recon over the targets after they bombed. And a lot of times they'd fly over before the mission. One of the airplanes that's kind of unique in the Air Force Museum is a blue Spitfire. If you look at that Spitfire, there are no guns. That's a photo recon airplane. It's got U.S. markings on it. That's part of what we call reverse lend-lease. Once we got in, before we got into the war, it was lend-lease. We were shipping ammunition, airplanes, ships, tanks to the Allies, right? Well, once we got into it, let's try out some of their stuff. So there's a Mosquito over there that's blue with U.S. markings on it. So we tried out these different airplanes, but that's what we refer to as reverse lend-lease. Now that Spitfire, most Spitfires leave England halfway in France, they got to come back because they're out of gas. But that Spitfire could go all the way to Berlin and back. So the story goes, the pilot flew from whatever base he was at to a coastal base there in England to top off his tanks. And the other Yanks there were saying, "Where are you going with that airplane?" He says, "Berlin." They said, "Yeah, right." But he had enough gas to make 2 passes over the target in Berlin and then come back. So that's a unique airplane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've seen that airplane over there. I think it's one they moved from down Main Street, here, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, first time I came here, I was at school in Illinois and flew over to T-29, like 1967. Everything was outside over in this part of the base.
That's right.
Yeah.
Had P-36 sitting right in the middle of it, yeah.
Anybody else? Yes?
How was your dad treated by the Germans in the POW camp?
That's an interesting question, because Because his name was German, he was probably treated a little bit better,
Okay,
but, you know, I mean, they probably didn't knock him around like they knocked some other ones around, but, he was a POW for 13 months in Stalag 17. And,
So, 17.
yeah.
yeah,
And his pilot navigator was Stalag Luft 3, which is up in north central Germany. The Germans separated the officers and the enlisted. The Germans separated the airmen from the army, and they treated them differently. The difference in how they treated enlisted versus officers, in Stalag 17, when a Red Cross parcel came in, it was supposed to be for an individual. Each individual was supposed to get one, right? Well, the Germans split it among 4. You know, and they either ate or kept it to themselves. In the officer camp, Stalag Luft 3, they split it among 2. You know, so there's a difference. And then he was liberated, Patton's army was part of what liberated him. In April, he was shot down in April 44. In April 45, the Russians were coming. Now, Stalag 17 is near Vienna. I don't know if you know that, but it's way out there near Vienna. So the Russians are coming. The Germans said, we need to get out of here. So they took all the Americans out of that camp, left the Russian POWs there, and marched all the way across Austria into Germany. You know, it took a couple of weeks anyway, but they were bivouacked in some woods in southern Germany when a U.S. Army Jeep came up with a captain and a sergeant, and you know they looked at these ragtag guys. They built lean-tos. They were sleeping under tree boughs and all that sort of thing. I saw this ragtag group and wanted to know what's going on. Well, the German guards came up to this captain and gave him their guns. Said, American POWs. Well, the sergeant is listening to the radio, and you could hear the cannons going off in distance because the war wasn't quite over yet. You hear the boom, boom. Well, the sergeant said, Captain, we gotta go. You know, so the captain gave the guns back to the German guards and said, watch them, we'll be back tomorrow. And so the next day, a bunch of deuce and a half showed up. But that's the way it was.
Wow.
Sir?
You showed how the lower squadron took most of the hits. Was that considered the most vulnerable?
Yes.
Why was that considered more vulnerable to be lower?
Well, the only thing I can surmise, I'm not a pilot. The only thing I can surmise, it was easier to get at the lower group than it would be to climb up to the higher group and get them. And they were always called Coffin Corner. And it just happened to be that was the position of my dad's squadron for that mission. They weren't always in that corner. You know, so they would move, and there were 4 squadrons at Grafton Underwood. The 547th wasn't on this one. Anybody else? Sure.
What altitude did the lower squadron fly?
Well, they were right at 23,000 feet. So
23,000 feet.
you know,
What's the range of an 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun?
oh, they were vulnerable.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah, that's,
They
the
said
high ones weren't.
Yeah, they said it was so thick you could walk on it. The flak.
I've
But
heard
then,
that.
what would happen is you have the fighters fighting you, but as soon as you got within gun range of a town like Schweinfurt, the enemy fighters peel off because they don't want to get shot down.
Yeah.
And then you have all that flak over the town, and you got to go through that, and you can't deviate. You just got to hold it straight and go through it.
That's it.
Because this country owes a lot to the young men like your dad,
Oh, yeah.
teenagers, early 20s, what they went through.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know the numbers, you probably do. With the B-17 crews, you had to fly 25 missions to go home.
Yeah.
The average crew got 15 or 17 or something.
Well, and that's one that I always talk about on my tours. But yeah, most people don't understand the 25. And so I'll ask them, do you understand why the number, because we're talking about Memphis Belle, right? So I asked them, do you understand the 25? Well, before they came up with a number, there was no number, and we were getting slaughtered. And the morale was in the toilet. So the 8th Air Force came up with 25. You fly 25 and you can go home. Now your chances of making 25 were less than 50-50. Dad was shot down on his 23rd. Now as it turns out, they had just upped it to 30. You know, so if you read the debriefings on this particular mission, and they always ask the guys who made it back, they ask him, you know, what can we do better? You know, what do we need to change? And they all said, we need to go back to 25. You know, because as the war went on and we decimated the Luftwaffe, then they upped it to 35, and it was 35 when the war ended. But one of the other things that most people don't realize, there were more 8th Air Force airmen killed over Europe than all of the Marines in the entire war. It was slaughter. You know, the Army and the Navy and the Marines, or the Air Force got it made. They can go to bed every night. That's if they make it. Yeah, so
That could have been,
there were more airmen, and that's just 8th Air Force, not 9th, not the 12th, not the 15th, but 8th Air Force. More of them were killed than all the Marines in the entire war. So yeah, it was tough. Anybody else? Well, thank you for coming. See you there. All right, now I can't figure out how to turn it off. If you want, I've got, let's get this out of the way. This is my dad's throat mic. My mother made that. My mother worked for Sher Brothers in Chicago. They're the ones that make these things. And then this is the yoke and his dog tags and his POW dog tags. Sure.
Right, so we'd like to show you our appreciation. And apparently I've cut myself, so I'm not going to shake your hand.
Hey, I've got sores all over.
All right, so we want to give you the certificate of appreciation to all who shall see these presents. Greetings. This certificate is awarded to Frank Alfter, Colonel, United States Air Force, retired, in recognition of his service to our great nation and for his continued dedication, commitment, and support to the ideals of patriotism this 27th day of September in the year 2023. So please take that as our thanks.
Thank you.
I can shake with my left hand.
Boy Scout.
Well, once again, it's good to see everybody out, even with the threat of weather on Wednesday again.
again,
On your programs, if you look on the back, there's an opportunity for you to sponsor some of our speakers. And of course, we depend on you to be successful, so help us get the word out to your friends and family. Invite them to come see all the great history we have here. And on a personal note, you may have noticed that Kathy hasn't been here for a while.
yes.
So
Yeah.
her mother is not expected to live more than a couple days, so please keep her in your thoughts. And with that, we'll wrap up this evening's festivities, and I appreciate you guys coming out. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
And I was surprised that you said P-47, that's pretty much.